Whispers in the Dark, The Echoes of a Night Stalker. By Brian Hamilton. A powerful PTSD survivor story unfolds as a veteran shares her hidden trauma and survival journey, finding hope and healing through a late-night radio call that resonates with listeners facing their own battles. It's not just a story about one woman's trauma, it's a story about the human spirit, the power of listening, and the resilience it takes to begin healing. Prelude. In the quiet hours of the night, as the city rests under a veil of shadow, the late-night radio show crackles to life, an unseen beacon for those lost in their own thoughts, seeking solace in the calm voice of Sam Mitchell. For years, Sam has listened to the stories of strangers, offering a place where hidden fears, hopes, and regrets could find their way to the surface. But tonight, a call comes through that will leave him, and his listeners, forever changed. A woman's voice filters through the static, taut with an unspoken weight, a gravity that Sam senses immediately. She calls herself a Night Stalker, and her words hint at a life shaped by darkness and trauma. The title alone is enough to spark Sam's curiosity, but as he listens, he realizes there is much more beneath the surface. Piece by piece, she reveals fragments of her past, memories of haunting missions, the weight of survival, and a fierce loyalty to those who did not make it home. As the woman's story unfolds, it becomes clear that this is no ordinary call. She's a veteran, the elite Night Stalkers, a unit known for their precision and bravery in some of the most dangerous operations. But her strength carries scars, and she grapples with survivor's guilt, haunted by memories of comrades' loss. This night, as she breaks the silence she's carried alone for so long, her voice reaches not just Sam but countless listeners who share her hidden pain. In the darkness, her story becomes a beacon for those who need to hear it most, a reminder that healing often begins with the courage to speak, and that even the heaviest burdens can be lightened when shared. Content warning: this PTSD survivor story contains descriptions of trauma, PTSD, survivor's guilt, and combat-related experiences. Some readers may find the content distressing. Please read with care. The Night Stalker. The clock above Sam Mitchell's desk read 12:03 a.m. He took a sip from his ever-present mug of coffee, wincing at the bitterness, but welcoming its warmth. The radio station, KRZY 108.4 FM, was housed in a nondescript building in Seattle's industrial outskirts, where the night seemed darker and quieter. A thick silence permeated the room between calls, broken only by the low hum of machinery and the quiet shuffle of his sound engineer packing up for the night. Sam had been hosting this late-night show for years, his smooth, calm voice a balm for sleepless listeners. People dialed in with their loneliness, their confessions, their odd stories of strange sightings or lost love. Every call was a story, each voice a puzzle piece he tried to fit into place, all while keeping his tone soothing, his demeanor open. It was a job that required patience and just enough curiosity. But tonight, the voice that crackled through the line was different. He pushed the button, his microphone lighting up as he leaned forward in his chair, adopting his practiced, welcoming tone. "Good evening, Seattle. You're on the air with Sam. What's on your mind tonight?" A pause. Static crackled. Then, in a voice that was taut, trembling ever so slightly, she spoke. I'm a Night Stalker," she managed, her voice barely holding steady, the words jagged and raw. She sounded like she'd been wrestling with saying those words for hours, as though something fragile might break in her just for saying them out loud. The weight in her voice unsettled Sam, catching him off guard. There was no bravado, no swagger in her words, only a fractured tension, a mix of fear and exhaustion that radiated across the line. Sam adjusted his tone, careful to keep it gentle. "A Night Stalker," he repeated, letting the words sink in. "Can you tell me what that means?" Another pause. Her breathing was uneven, almost like she was struggling to ground herself. I don't know," she whispered, the vulnerability in her voice deepening the mystery. Sam felt a flicker of apprehension, barely detectable, but enough to sit him up straighter in his chair. Her words were heavy, weighted with something he couldn't yet place. He took a beat, then responded with a neutral but curious tone. "Night Stalker. Is that a nickname or something?" The line went quiet, but he could hear her breathing, the tension thick enough to pulse between them. Finally, her voice came again, this time softer, as if she was struggling to get the words out. I'm a Night Stalker, she repeated, her voice strained, almost pleading. The way she said it, Sam sensed she wasn't boasting. There was no bravado, no thrill. Just a raw, unspoken pain that raised the hairs on his neck. Sam felt his mind turning over possibilities. Was she a criminal? An insomniac wandering the city streets at night? Someone desperate to confess something? He was used to handling sensitive subjects, people who spoke in coded language, people who needed to be drawn out gently. "All right," he said, his tone cautious, controlled. "Night Stalker. Can you tell me what that means?" She didn't answer right away, as if considering her words carefully. Sam waited, letting the silence linger, but he was growing more intrigued by the second. The way she held back, the desperation woven into each syllable, it wasn't something he could just let pass. I don't know where to start," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. He caught the faintest tremor in her words, the sound of someone straddling the line between control and chaos. Sam softened his voice even further, leaning into the mic as if speaking to her alone, though he knew the whole city could be listening. "Take your time," he said gently. "Wherever you're comfortable. I'm here to listen." A shaky breath came through the line, and Sam imagined her somewhere in the dark, clutching the phone like a lifeline. She spoke again, haltingly, her voice almost too quiet to pick up. "I'm a Night Stalker. That's all I know anymore." Something about the way she said it stirred a strange feeling in his gut. He'd heard the confessions of restless souls and troubled minds long enough to recognize pain when he heard it. And this pain was unique, a fractured thing hiding behind a title that made him uneasy. "Okay," Sam said slowly. "So, you're a Night Stalker. And it sounds like that's difficult for you to talk about." She didn't respond immediately. Sam held his breath, the suspense clawing at him as he tried to piece her together from just these few, brittle words. After a long silence, she murmured, "You wouldn't understand." Sam's curiosity deepened. "Maybe not," he admitted, "but you called in for a reason. Something brought you here tonight, and I'd like to understand. Take your time." The static hummed on the line, and she let out a trembling breath. "It's not something I'm proud of," she said, almost like she was talking to herself. "It's who I was. Who I thought I'd left behind. But no matter how hard I try, I'm still there. I'm still," her voice broke, a raw sound that tightened Sam's chest. "I'm still a Night Stalker." Sam glanced at the monitor, seeing the signal strong, the lights on the switchboard glowing softly in the dim room, and he felt the weight of her words settle over him. "All right," he said, his voice a bit firmer, more grounded, as if to anchor her to the moment. "Let's start from the beginning. Why don't you tell me what it means to be a Night Stalker?" A pause, and then, as if in defeat, she whispered, "It means I can't escape the darkness." And as she said it, Sam could feel it too, the creeping shadows of her unspoken story, the secrets hiding just out of reach, waiting to be uncovered. Sam leaned forward, careful not to let the silence grow too heavy. He sensed something fragile on the other end of the line, something frayed that might snap if he pushed too hard. "Okay," he said gently, keeping his tone soft, inviting. "You said you can't escape the darkness. Can you tell me a little more about that?" She hesitated, her breathing growing faintly audible through the static, and he imagined her somewhere in the shadows, clutching the phone, wrestling with words that didn't want to come. After a long pause, she spoke. I don't know if you can understand," she murmured, her voice distant. "It's like, there's a part of me that never left. A part of me still there, in the shadows." "Still where?" he asked, careful to keep his tone neutral, unthreatening. But she didn't answer. Instead, she seemed to drift further into herself, like she was slipping down a narrow, haunted hallway, the walls closing in. "It follows me," she whispered, as if confiding in herself more than to him. "No matter how far I go, it follows me back into the light." The way she spoke was cryptic, a riddle wrapped in sorrow, but Sam didn't press. He sensed a tension, an unease that seemed to thicken with each word. "Whatever's following you," he said carefully, "whatever it is you're carrying, you don't have to carry it alone tonight. I'm here." Her breathing hitched, then quickened. I thought I left it behind, she said, the words coming faster now, rushing out like a confession. I thought I buried it there, but it's still here. It's still here in the silence, and I can hear it. Sam's chest tightened as her voice broke, her breath coming in shorter bursts, each one sharper than the last. He recognized the signs, the rising panic, the disjointed words, a heart racing through old fears, trapped in a memory that wouldn't let go. Hey, he said gently, his voice a steady anchor. Hey, let's take a breath, okay? Focus on where you are right now. You're safe. You're here with me, just the two of us, and you're safe. She didn't answer, her breathing rapid, frantic. Sam felt a swell of urgency but kept his voice calm, controlled. Take a deep breath, he coached, lowering his tone even more, letting it ground her. Just breathe in and let it out. Feel the floor under your feet, feel the phone in your hand. You're here. You're not there. Her breath slowed, stuttering as she fought to regain control. He waited, counting the beats, listening as her breathing gradually eased, softening into something calmer, steadier. I'm sorry, she whispered after a moment. Her voice was raw, vulnerable, like someone coming out of a storm. I didn't mean to. I'm sorry. No need to apologize, Sam assured her, keeping his tone warm and gentle. It's okay. You're here, and you're doing great. A long pause settled over them, a silence filled with fragile tension. She seemed to be gathering herself, pulling the pieces of her scattered mind back together, trying to make sense of the things that haunted her. Sometimes it's like I'm still there, she said finally, her voice barely audible. The sound, the shadows. I still hear them. I can't make them stop. Sam's heart squeezed with both compassion and unease. He could hear the trauma woven into her words, the pain just under the surface, raw and jagged. Whatever she was holding onto, it was deep, rooted, a wound that hadn't healed. What do you hear? He asked quietly, not wanting to break the fragile thread connecting them. She hesitated, her voice drifting. The rotors. I can still hear the rotors. Her tone was distant, like she was caught between worlds, her mind somewhere else, somewhere dark and cold. They were so loud. So loud they shook the ground. But now it's different. Now it's just empty. A chill slid down Sam's spine, the weight of her words wrapping around him. She wasn't talking in the present tense, he realized. She was somewhere else, lost in a memory, in a place where the past blurred with the present. I'm here, he reminded her, his voice soft and steady, grounding her in the present. Right here, listening. The line hummed with silence, her breathing softening, calming. Then, her voice came again, trembling and almost detached, as if she were reciting a distant, painful memory. There were nights, in the darkest hours, we were ghosts. That's what they called us, the ones who came and left in silence. The ones who moved through shadows. Sam felt the hair rise on his arms, his pulse quickening. She was saying things, giving hints that formed an outline of something immense, something he was only beginning to glimpse. Is that what it means? He asked carefully, piecing it together. To be a Night Stalker? Her voice was faint, barely a whisper. Yes. That's what it means. The words fell heavy, laden with sorrow, but she offered nothing more, holding her secrets tightly. For a moment, the line was silent, and Sam sensed the weight she was carrying, the darkness that seemed to coil around her memories. He wanted to help her, wanted to understand, but he knew he had to tread carefully. Is there something from those nights you're still carrying? He asked gently, trying to coax her into sharing more. She hesitated, and her breathing grew shallow again, the tension rising in her voice. It's always there, she murmured, her voice thick with grief. Every time I close my eyes. It's like the night never ends. Sam's heart twisted with compassion, his voice softening even more. You're not there anymore. You're here, right now, talking to me. And I'm here with you, listening. You're not alone. Another pause, a breath of silence that seemed to stretch on forever, and then she whispered, her voice filled with a sadness that felt almost too heavy to bear, the shadows are too deep. Sam closed his eyes, feeling the weight of her words settle over him, heavy and cold. Whatever she was carrying, it was dark, something buried so deep it had taken root. But for now, she was here, sharing that burden, and he was determined to stay with her, to guide her through the darkness one step at a time. A faint tremor filled the woman's voice as she began to speak, almost as if the words were slipping out of her control, unfiltered, raw. She wasn't talking to Sam so much as she was talking to herself, piecing together fragments of something dark and half-buried. "I can still feel it," she whispered. "The cold of it. The weight of the controls in my hands." We were flying low, skimming treetops, feeling the ground reach up to swallow us. There was so much dark. The night was endless. Sam stayed silent, picking up on the strange language, sensing that her words had shifted to some other plane, as if she were back in another time, another place. He could feel the tension in her voice, the crackling edge of something that felt both powerful and broken. "We moved through shadows," she murmured, her voice softer, almost detached. "Rapid descents. No light. No sign of anything but the outlines of the mountains. We were invisible." A chill ran through Sam as he began to make connections. The cryptic phrases, the dark, the sense of weight and danger. He wondered if she was recalling memories of flight, but he held back, unsure, waiting to see if she would reveal more. The woman's voice wavered, growing soft, hesitant, like she was balancing on the edge of something she couldn't fully explain. "Sometimes I still feel it," she murmured, as if talking to herself. "Like it never ended. Like I never left that sky." Sam felt a pang of sympathy, realizing he might be witnessing the resurfacing of a trauma that had followed her long past its time. He kept his tone calm, gentle. "You don't have to go back there if it's too much," he said softly, allowing her the space to step back if she needed. "You're here now. You're safe." Her breathing caught, and there was a shaky inhale, then a low exhale, as if she were trying to steady herself, to stay grounded. She took a moment, then spoke, her voice softer, almost apologetic. "I'm sorry. I thought I could put it all away. Leave it behind. But it's like the night is still following me." Sam felt a pang of compassion, imagining what it might be like to live with shadows that never lifted, memories that clawed their way back to the surface no matter how hard you tried to bury them. "Sometimes," he said gently, "the past has a way of following us, even when we do everything to escape it." She fell silent, but he sensed her considering his words. Her breathing slowed, the silence stretching, and then she spoke again, her tone barely more than a whisper. "It's like I'm still there. I'll wake up, and it's dark. And the air feels heavy. And I hear the rotors, the rumble of it all around me. And then I realize I'm back in it. Back where everything went wrong." Her words were layered with something raw, something Sam couldn't quite touch, but it felt like fear, like regret. He could feel her fighting to stay present, to keep herself from slipping back into whatever darkness had consumed her that night. "You're not there," he reminded her softly, anchoring her with his steady tone. "You're here with me. It's okay." She took another breath, steadier this time, and then there was a quiet, fragile silence before she spoke again. "Thank you," she whispered. "I try to remember that, but it's hard. It's like the night is in me. I don't know how to escape it." Sam waited, letting the silence sow, giving her the space she needed. And then, almost reluctantly, she continued, her voice tight, like she was clinging to each word as she spoke it. "There was one place," she said, her voice low, almost reverent. "Nuristan province. That's where everything changed." The name dropped like a stone in the quiet air, heavy, pulsing with an energy that seemed to linger between them. Even without knowing what it meant, Sam felt a strange dread settle in his stomach. He didn't know the place, but he could hear the fear in her voice, the weight of whatever memories were tied to that name. "Nuristan," he repeated, keeping his tone neutral but cautious. "That's a place you went?" Her voice broke slightly, tightening. "Yes. It's hard to explain. It was so isolated. A place hidden in the mountains, surrounded by thick forests, steep cliffs. The shadows there, it felt like we were the only ones. like we'd flown into something we couldn't come back from. Sam listened, hearing the strain in her voice, the memory thickening her words. He realized this place, this Nuristan province, was something pivotal, something that held her in a way she couldn't escape. And whatever had happened there, it had left her trapped in a darkness that refused to let go. Nuristan must have been a difficult place, he offered, keeping his tone gentle, non-intrusive, hoping to coax out a little more without pushing too hard. It was, she trailed off, as if grappling with something vast, something she couldn't quite hold. I can still feel it sometimes. The weight of the controls. The sound of the rotors. We were there for a reason, a mission, but it felt wrong. Like we weren't supposed to be there. Her voice trembled, and Sam sensed she was balancing on the edge of her memories, fighting to keep herself present. You don't have to go back there, he said softly, a reminder that she was safe, that she was here with him, far from whatever had happened in that place. She took a breath, grounding herself, pulling her mind back from the depths of memory. I know. I don't know how to shake it. It's like the night is part of me now, like it's all I know. Sam's heart twisted as he listened, understanding that for her, Nuristan was a place that held more than memories. It was a shadow, a presence that had seeped into her bones, a place that followed her even in the light. But he wasn't going to let her face it alone, not tonight. You're not alone, he said quietly, his voice warm and steady, offering her the comfort of being heard, of not having to carry her memories in silence. She didn't respond right away, but he heard the faintest shift in her breathing, a soft, unspoken acknowledgement. And in that moment, he felt the fragile connection between them strengthen, her voice a thread stretching back to a night that had never truly ended, a night she was finally beginning to share. Sam took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her silence, the guardedness she wore like a second skin. He knew he couldn't rush her, that trust was something fragile, easily shattered if mishandled. But he also knew that if he could reach her, if he could find a way to build a connection, she might feel safe enough to tell her story, to release at least some of the pain that seemed to hold her captive. You know, he began, keeping his tone soft, steady, my brother, he's a vet too. Came back from deployment a few years ago. He paused, choosing his words carefully, not wanting to sound like he was trying to compare his experience to hers. He didn't like to talk about it much. And I respected that. But I could see it, the way he carried, the way it changed him. The woman remained silent, but he sensed her listening, her breaths quiet and even. He pressed on, gently, knowing she needed to hear that she wasn't alone. There were times at night, he continued, his voice dropping as he recalled his brother's haunted gaze, when he'd just sit in the dark, staring at nothing. He said he felt like he was still there, back in that place. Sometimes he'd wake up drenched in sweat, his fists clenched. It was like a part of him never made it home. She didn't respond, but he felt a slight shift on the line, a soft exhale, and he hoped his words were reaching her, letting her know that there were people who understood, even if only a little. So, I don't know exactly what you're going through, he admitted, his tone open, honest. But I've seen a glimpse of it. And if there's anything you want to say, anything you need to get out, I'm here to listen. Another pause, stretching longer this time, and then she spoke, her voice fragile, like she was testing the strength of her own words. Thank you, she whispered. It's hard to find people who understand. Take your time, he encouraged gently. There's no rush. I'm here for as long as you need. Her voice wavered as she continued, her tone softer, more vulnerable than before. I used to be someone, she said slowly. Someone I could look at in the mirror and feel proud of. I worked hard to get there. But now, when I look at myself, it's like there's no one there. Just hollow. Sam felt a pang of empathy, understanding what it was to feel like you'd lost pieces of yourself along the way. He kept his voice steady, reassuring. Sometimes trauma can take parts of us. It doesn't mean you're lost. You're still here. She took a shaky breath, and he sensed she was weighing her words, struggling between wanting to tell her story and the instinct to protect it, to hold it close where no one else could reach. I don't know who I am anymore, she said, her voice cracking slightly. I used to be strong. Unbreakable. I thought nothing could touch me. But now, it's like all that's left is the night. Like it's taken over. The night, Sam repeated softly, hearing the resonance of pain in her voice. It sounds like the night holds a lot for you. More than most people could imagine. She hesitated, and he could feel her pulling back, but she took a steadying breath and continued, her voice low, almost inaudible. I was part of something. Part of a group. We were called Night Stalkers. Sam's heart skipped, the weight of her words settling in, her voice carrying a reverence that hinted at something extraordinary. He still didn't fully understand what it meant, but he sensed the significance, the way the title was steeped in history, in duty, and in something else, something that seemed to hurt her even now. Night Stalkers, he said gently, his curiosity piqued. That sounds important. It was, she murmured, almost to herself. It was everything. The way she said it, with both pride and sorrow, hinted at a story Sam couldn't fully see, but he didn't push. He simply waited, letting her choose her own path through the memories, letting her decide how much she wanted to share. She took another breath, her tone growing distant, reflective. We were ghosts, shadows moving through the dark. We went places others wouldn't dare, did things no one else could. There were no lights, no signs. Just the darkness. Sam listened, realizing he was hearing fragments of a life few could comprehend, a world built on secrecy and sacrifice. But he could feel the weight it had placed on her, a burden she carried even now, unable to lay it down. And that's what you meant, he said slowly, piecing it together, when you said you're still a Night Stalker. Yes, she whispered, the word barely a breath. I thought I could leave it behind, but it's like, it's woven into me. No matter how far I run, I can't outrun it. I can't escape the night. Her voice faded, like she was slipping back into the shadows of her memories, the fragments of herself she tried to leave in the past but couldn't. Maybe, Sam said gently, it's not about outrunning it. Maybe it's about finding a way to let it live with you, instead of haunting you. There was a long pause, and he wondered if his words had reached her. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft, contemplative, as though she were seeing a glimmer of hope for the first time. I don't know if I'm strong enough for that, she admitted, her vulnerability raw and open. Just by being here, by sharing this with me, you're showing strength, he replied. And I'm here with you, for as long as you need. You're not alone in this. Another pause, but this time, he felt a slight shift, a loosening of the tension that had been wrapped around her words. She wasn't free from the shadows yet, but he sensed that maybe, for the first time, she was letting someone in, allowing herself to be seen. For the first time, it felt like she wasn't just a voice on the line. She was a person, someone who'd seen too much, someone who'd carried too much. But in that moment, she was also someone who was beginning to find her way out of the night. And Sam, too, felt a quiet, steady resolve to walk with her, step by step, until she reached the light again. There was a long silence on the line, and Sam waited, sensing she was on the edge of something, a memory she was teetering close to, one that seemed to pull her in like a gravitational force. When she spoke again, her voice was distant, drifting, almost like she wasn't talking to him at all but instead narrating a scene playing out in front of her, something only she could see. It was one of those nights, she began, her voice soft and taut. The kind where the air is thick, and everything feels too still. There's a tension you can feel, like the sky itself is waiting for something to happen. Sam leaned closer to the microphone, listening as her voice softened, taking on the tone of someone lost in memory. Her words were measured, each one carrying her further away from the present and deeper into whatever night she was reliving. The engines, they roared, but we kept low. Always low. Just high enough to clear the trees, but not high enough to be seen. There's a rhythm to it, a focus that takes every part of you. Your whole body becomes attuned to the machine, to the pulse of the rotors, the sway and pull as you dodge terrain. You forget your own heartbeat because all that matters is staying in sync with that helicopter. Her voice grew quieter, her breathing steady but taut, and Sam could almost feel the intensity of her concentration, the mental and physical control it took to keep that machine moving through the shadows, unseen, silent but for the vibrations in her chest. We were headed into, well, we called it the edge of hell, she murmured, the hint of a grim smile in her voice. It was deep, deeper than we'd ever gone. There were mountain ridges on either side, cliffs that dropped into darkness, valleys that seemed to breathe, full of shadows that felt alive. And we had to fly right into the heart of it. Sam shivered, the image of the darkened mountains forming in his mind. He imagined her gripping the controls, her eyes scanning the blackness, her entire focus honed to a razor's edge, guiding her crew through a place no one was meant to go. It was like every sense was heightened, she continued, her voice strained. The mountains loomed, pressing down, so close I could see the jagged rocks and trees tearing through the mist. We had to stay so low that even the slightest shift could have sent us crashing into the side of the cliffs. Her voice wavered slightly, a tremor of something deeper, fear, maybe, or the memory of what came next. Sam felt his heart tighten, hanging on her words, waiting, almost holding his breath as she took them both deeper into her past. And the silence, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. It was all around us. We were nothing but shadows in the dark, moving through a place where no light could reach. You could almost feel it, the weight of the night. It wrapped around us, pulling us in, keeping us hidden. But it also felt like it was waiting to swallow us. She paused, and Sam could hear the strain in her breathing, the tremor in her voice as she lingered on the memory. There was something about the way she spoke that felt like she was standing on the edge of a cliff, staring down into a darkness that had never left her. Was that when? Sam began, then stopped, realizing he didn't know what he was asking. He only knew that whatever she was about to say, it was something heavy, something life-altering. She took a shaky breath, as if trying to pull herself back, steadying herself. That night, that mission, it changed everything. It was supposed to be simple. We were supposed to go in and out. Just a quick extraction. Her voice grew taut, and Sam could feel the tension building, the way her words were weighted with something she hadn't yet spoken, something that felt like it might shatter if she let it out. But nothing felt right, she whispered. From the moment we crossed into that valley, I knew something was off. The air was thick, heavy, almost suffocating. The shadows were too deep. It was like the whole place was holding its breath. Sam's heart was pounding, but he kept his voice soft, calm. Sounds like a dangerous place, he said gently. I can only imagine the courage it took to be there, to fly through that. She stopped suddenly, as if catching herself. Her voice grew tight, controlled. I shouldn't have gone so far, she said, her tone apologetic, a hint of panic creeping into her words. I shouldn't be telling you this. It's too much. Sam felt the shift, the way she was pulling back, retreating into herself, the memories starting to take their toll. He stepped in gently, his voice soft, soothing. It's okay. You don't have to share anything you're not ready for. I'm here to listen, only if it helps you. Her breathing slowed, steadying, and she seemed to take comfort in his words, grounding herself in the present. I don't know why I'm telling you all this, she murmured, her voice faint, fragile. Sometimes, Sam replied, saying it out loud can take away some of the weight. You don't have to be alone in those memories anymore. A long silence hung on the line, thick and heavy, and then she exhaled, as if releasing a small part of the burden she carried. Thank you, she whispered, her voice soft, almost relieved. And though she hadn't yet told him the full story, Sam felt the smallest shift, a step closer to understanding. He realized that she had carried this darkness alone for far too long, and tonight, she had let him in, even if just a little. The line hummed with silence, and for a moment, Sam wondered if she was still there, if the weight of her memories had become too much. But then she took a breath, shaky and uneven, and her voice drifted back, softer now, almost fragile. There was a night, she began, her voice trembling. A night that started like so many others, but it didn't end that way. Sam felt the tension in her words, the way each syllable seemed to pull her back into a memory she'd fought hard to keep buried. He stayed quiet, listening, sensing that the story was unraveling in pieces, fractured and raw. It happened so fast, she whispered, almost as if she were talking to herself. We were flying low, trying to keep out of sight. And then, I don't even know where it came from. Her voice grew faint, distant, as if she were reliving the scene. 1 second, everything was smooth, controlled. The next, there was this explosion. A flash of light, fire, it hit us out of nowhere. Her breathing quickened, and Sam could almost feel the pulse of panic radiating through the line, the way she was struggling to hold onto the present, to keep herself from slipping entirely back into that moment. The impact. I remember it so clearly, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. It was like the whole world just stopped. The controls went dead in my hands. The helicopter lurched, and I felt the ground rushing up to meet us, and there was nothing I could do. Nothing. Sam's heart clenched as he listened, feeling the fear in her voice, the helplessness that seemed to fill every word. He imagined her there, gripping the controls, watching everything fall apart in a split second, the world spinning out of control. And the sounds, she murmured, her voice breaking slightly. The shouts, the panic. I could hear them, my crew, the ones I was supposed to protect. They were calling out, and I couldn't. Her voice wavered, and Sam sensed she was holding back, caught between wanting to say more and the pain of reliving it. He let the silence stretch, giving her time, knowing that whatever she was trying to share was something she had never spoken aloud. I don't remember the landing, she said, her tone hollow. Just the chaos after. The smoke, the heat, the way everything was scattered, broken. My whole crew, we were just lying there, in the middle of enemy territory, no backup, no chance of getting out. Her voice drifted, a haunting emptiness in her words. Sam could sense her standing in the wreckage, the shadows and smoke, surrounded by the remnants of what had once been under her control. He felt a pang of sorrow, of respect for her struggle, but he kept his tone gentle, encouraging, letting her know he was still there. It sounds like you went through something unimaginable, he said softly, his voice barely more than a whisper. And you made it through, somehow. You're here, telling me this. There was a long pause, and when she spoke again, her voice was barely audible, each word laced with a deep, lingering sorrow. Not all of us made it. Some of them didn't come back. I lost people that night. People who trusted me. Sam's chest tightened, a quiet ache settling in as he listened to the pain she'd held inside, the way her voice faltered under the weight of it. I'm so sorry, he said quietly. I can only imagine how hard it must be to carry that. It's not something I talk about, she murmured, her voice fragile, almost like she was confessing a sin. Not even with my family. They know the story, the polished version. The one I told the army. The one in the reports. But this part, I never told anyone. Sam let the silence linger, feeling the significance of her words, the trust she was placing in him, the courage it took for her to speak these things that had weighed on her soul for so long. You don't have to carry it alone, he said gently. You don't have to keep it hidden anymore, not if it's hurting you. A shaky breath came through the line, and he could hear the slight tremor in her voice as she gathered herself, as if wrestling with the enormity of her past. I thought I could handle it. I thought if I stayed quiet, if I didn't think about it, that maybe it would just fade. But it hasn't. It's like they're still there, waiting. The ones who didn't make it. Her words hung in the air, heavy, saturated with grief. Sam imagined the faces she saw in her mind, the voices she could still hear, ghosts of a night that refused to let her go. You were there with them, he said softly. And you did everything you could to get them home. Her voice broke again, barely holding together. I don't know if it was enough. I don't know if I was enough. I made it out, but I left parts of myself there. Parts one don't think I'll ever get back. Sam felt a pang of sorrow, a quiet understanding of the cost of survival, the guilt that came with it. He kept his voice steady, letting her know he was there, letting her feel his presence in the silence. You survived, he said gently. And that takes a strength most people can't even imagine. You're here, carrying this story, sharing it. That's an incredible strength. A faint, shuddering sigh came through the line, and he sensed a release, a tiny piece of the burden she had carried loosening, her voice softening as if she were finally allowing herself to feel a small measure of the weight she had held so tightly. I don't feel strong, she whispered. I feel broken. Like I'm still trapped there, in that night, with the pieces of everything we lost. Sam swallowed, his voice thick with empathy. Sometimes strength doesn't feel like strength, he said quietly. Sometimes it's just surviving, just taking one more step. And you're doing that. You're still here. There was another silence, and when she spoke again, her voice held a fragile gratitude. Thank you, for listening. For not turning away. I'm here, Sam said gently, his voice steady, unwavering. And I'm not going anywhere. For the first time that night, there was a softness in her silence, a faint glimmer of peace, as if, just for a moment, she was allowing herself to share the darkness she had carried alone for so long. For a moment, the line was quiet, and Sam felt the weight of her silence, the unspoken relief mingled with grief, the way she seemed to exhale pieces of the darkness that had haunted her for so long. Thank you, he said softly, his voice full of empathy. Thank you for trusting me with this. It takes courage to share a story like yours, especially when it holds so much pain. I want you to know. I'm honored that you did. There was a pause, a faint sound of her drawing in a shaky breath. He could tell she wasn't used to hearing her pain acknowledged so openly, to being told that her story mattered. He kept his tone calm, steady, hoping his words would help ground her, to show her that she was seen, heard, and understood. None of what you went through, he continued, his voice warm and unwavering, none of it was your fault. You did everything you could. You were there with them, fighting alongside them, and that's something powerful. You weren't in control of what happened that night. You did everything you could to get them home. Another breath, almost hesitant, and then her voice came through, softer now, her tone laden with a quiet vulnerability. I don't know if I'll ever believe that, she admitted. Sometimes, when it's dark, I feel like I'm still there, like I can't escape it. The memories, they just follow me. No matter how hard I try to shut them out. Sam nodded, listening intently, feeling the pain in her voice, the way she was opening up more, sharing pieces of herself she'd probably kept hidden for years. I can only imagine how hard that must be, he said gently. You went through something no one should have to face. It makes sense that it's difficult to leave behind. But you don't have to face it alone anymore. There was a long pause, and when she spoke again, her voice was tinged with exhaustion, as if each word carried the weight of years spent battling her own mind. After I came back, everything felt different, she murmured, her tone hollow. I tried to settle into a normal life, to blend in, to just disappear. But every night, I'd wake up in a panic, my heart racing, drenched in sweat. I'd hear the sounds, the rotors, the gunfire. It's like my mind didn't know how to let go. Sam could feel the sadness in her words, the struggle she endured just to exist in a world that felt foreign and distant after her experiences. He imagined the nights she spent alone with her memories, the way the past haunted her even in the quiet of sleep. I can't imagine how isolating that must feel, he said softly. But I want you to know that what you're feeling is a response to trauma. It's not a weakness, and it's not something you should have to bear alone. You've been carrying this for too long, and you don't deserve to suffer in silence. Her voice grew tight, almost strained, as if she were fighting against something she'd kept buried. Sometimes I feel like I shouldn't have survived, she said, her tone laden with guilt. I lost people that night. People who trusted me. They didn't make it, but I did. And sometimes, I don't know why. Sam's heart ached as he listened, feeling the depth of her pain, the way survivor's guilt had wrapped itself around her, trapping her in a prison of self-doubt and regret. He kept his tone gentle, steady, hoping to offer her even the smallest measure of comfort. It sounds like you've been carrying the weight of that night for a long time, he said softly, his voice full of compassion. Survivor's guilt it's a heavy thing. It makes us question why we're here when others aren't. But you made it through something impossible, and that doesn't make you unworthy. It makes you strong. She took a shuddering breath, and he sensed her defenses loosening, her willingness to let him in, to share what she had held alone for so long. It's hard to believe that sometimes, she murmured. I try to remind myself that I did what I could, that I didn't choose who made it and who didn't. But it feels like I left pieces of myself behind. Like the best parts of me stayed there, with them. Sam's voice softened, his words filled with empathy. Maybe those pieces didn't stay there. Maybe they're still with you, but they're hidden behind the pain, behind the things you've been holding back. And maybe by letting yourself talk about it, by sharing the story, you can start to find those pieces again. The line was silent, and Sam waited, letting her absorb his words, letting her feel the comfort of someone who didn't need her to be anything other than what she was, a person healing, a person finding her way. After a long pause, her voice came back, almost tentative. I don't know if I'll ever be the person I used to be, she whispered. But maybe that's okay. Maybe I don't have to be. Maybe this is just part of who I am now. Sam smiled softly, a warmth filling his voice. Maybe it is. And maybe that's enough. You don't have to be who you were. You just have to keep going, one day at a time. And it sounds like you're already doing that. A faint, almost fragile sigh escaped her, and he sensed a quiet release, a slight easing of the weight she carried. Thank you, she murmured, her voice tinged with a softness he hadn't heard before. I don't think I realized how much I needed to say this. To say any of it. I'm glad you did, Sam replied warmly. And I'm here whenever you need to share more. You're not alone in this, not anymore. For the first time, there was a softness in the silence that followed, a hint of peace, and Sam felt a quiet gratitude settle over him, knowing he had been able to offer her even a small measure of comfort. And in that moment, he understood that sometimes, the greatest gift we can give is simply to listen, to offer another person the chance to be heard, to be seen. For the first time in a long time, it seemed like she might be ready to take that step forward, to begin the journey of finding herself again, one day, one memory, one breath at a time. The silence on the line grew long and heavy, and Sam waited, sensing the enormity of what she was about to share. He could almost feel her gathering her strength, pulling together the threads of a memory that had stayed locked away for far too long. After a deep breath, her voice came through, soft but steady, each word deliberate and weighted. It was a mission I'll never forget, she began. Nuristan province, late summer. I remember the darkness of that night, thicker than anything I'd ever seen. The sky was clear, not a single cloud, but the mountains loomed around us, tall and unforgiving. There was no moon. Just shadows and silence. Sam could picture it as she spoke, the vast, dark landscape, the jagged mountain ridges rising like sentinels against the night. The tension in her voice was palpable, as if she were reliving each moment, caught between memory and reality. Our objective was simple, she continued. We were supposed to extract a small unit that had been pinned down for days. We had the coordinates, we had a route. It was supposed to be quick and clean. We'd done it 100 times before. She paused, and Sam heard the faintest tremor in her voice, a crack in her composure that told him just how far from routine that night had become. But nothing about it felt right, she said, her tone darkening. From the moment we crossed into that valley, I felt. I don't know. It was like something was watching us. The mountains were too close, the valleys too narrow. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were exposed. Her voice dropped lower, tinged with a haunted edge. We flew low, hugging the terrain. I remember the sounds, the hum of the rotors slicing through the air, the hum of the engine against the quiet of the night. We were completely blacked out, every light off. All I could see were the outlines of the trees, the sharp angles of the cliffs on either side. Sam held his breath, captivated by the intensity of her description, the way she painted the scene so vividly that he could almost feel himself there with her, flying through the dark with nothing but her instincts guiding the way. Then, as we got closer to the extraction zone, everything went wrong, she said, her voice faltering slightly. We didn't see it coming. 1 minute, we were gliding through the dark, the next, there was this flash of light. It was like the whole sky exploded. And then, impact. She paused, her breathing shallow, and Sam felt a surge of empathy, imagining the terror that must have seized her in that moment, the sudden, brutal realization that they'd been hit. It was an RPG, she said, her voice tight. Hit us right on the left side, near the fuel tank. The explosion. I can still feel the heat of it, the jolt as the chopper lurched, spinning out of control. My hands were on the controls, but it was like the whole world had slipped out from under us. Sam felt a chill run down his spine, his heart pounding in time with her words. He could picture the chaos, the spinning darkness, the helplessness of watching everything fall apart. The crew was shouting, but I couldn't hear them clearly. There was too much noise, Mel groaning, the wind screaming through the open doors. We were falling, and all I could think was that this was it. This was the end. Her voice cracked, but she held herself together, pressing forward, determined to finish the story. We went down fast. I tried to steady us, to at least give us a controlled crash, but there was nothing I could do. We slammed into the side of a ravine. I don't know how long it took, but when we finally hit the ground, everything went silent. Sam listened, feeling the weight of her words, the silence that had followed the crash echoing in the line between them, a silence that spoke of destruction, of lives hanging in the balance. I was disoriented, she said, her voice hollow. Everything hurt. My vision was blurred, my ears ringing. The first thing I noticed was the smoke, thick and choking. I realized I had to move, had to get out, had to see if anyone else was alive. Her breathing grew unsteady, and Sam imagined her stumbling through the wreckage, fighting through pain and shock, her instincts guiding her even as her mind struggled to process what had happened. I found my co-pilot first, she continued, her voice barely a whisper. He was alive, but barely. There were others, some were hurt, some weren't moving at all. Sam could feel the grief woven into her words, the weight of loss pressing down on her. He didn't interrupt, sensing that this was the part of the story she'd never been able to share, the part that had stayed locked in her memory, festering. I was the only one who could walk, she said, her voice trembling. I took charge. It didn't feel like a choice, it was survival. We were in enemy territory, stranded with no way to call for backup. I didn't have time to think about what I'd lost. All I could do was focus on getting us out. Her tone grew taut, edged with tension. I led the survivors out of the wreckage and into the trees. The forest was thick, dense like a jungle. Every step felt like a risk. Every sound was an enemy we couldn't see. Sam could feel the intensity of her memories, the fear that must have coursed through her as she led her injured crew through the dark, the shadows closing in around them. We spent days moving, hiding, trying to stay out of sight, she said, her voice tight with emotion. We rationed what little water we had, took turns keeping watch, barely slept. The nights were the worst. We could hear them, the enemy patrols, searching, combing the area. We had to stay completely still, breathing so shallow we could barely fill our lungs. Sam was silent, captivated, feeling her fear, her desperation. He could barely imagine what it must have been like, the relentless pressure, the weight of responsibility as she led her crew through the dark, every step a gamble. Finally, we reached the extraction point, she said, her voice laced with exhaustion. But even then, it wasn't over. Sam felt his heart pound as he listened, sensing the final twist in her story, the moment when she must have thought they'd made it, only for fate to throw one last challenge in their path. The enemy found us just as we were waiting for the chopper, she whispered. We barely had time to react. There was gunfire, bullets ripping through the air, and I had to make a choice. I had to keep them alive, keep fighting, even when I didn't think I had anything left. Her voice broke, and Sam could feel her reliving that final, brutal firefight, the terror of facing down death after everything she'd already survived. I don't know how we made it out, she murmured. I remember hearing the chopper, seeing it coming in through the trees, but it felt like a dream. Like we'd never really make it. Her voice fell silent, and Sam waited, sensing the weight of the story she'd just shared, the way she'd laid bare her darkest memories, her most painful truths. You did make it, he said gently, his voice filled with quiet respect. You survived. And you brought them back with you. There was a long silence, and then, finally, a soft, shaky breath, as if she were letting go of a burden she'd carried for too long. Thank you, she whispered, her voice filled with a gratitude that went beyond words. I didn't know how much I needed to tell someone. Sam felt a quiet strength settle over him, a sense of purpose. He'd been able to give her something she hadn't found anywhere else, a space to be heard, to be understood, to share the weight of her memories. And in that moment, he knew that he'd stay with her, that he'd be there as long as she needed him, a quiet presence in the dark, guiding her back toward the light. A long, heavy silence hung in the air after she finished her story, the final words settling between them like the last echoes of a storm. Sam could almost feel her across the line, exhausted and fragile, the weight of everything she had held inside finally finding release. Then, slowly, she let out a deep breath, a sound that was more than just air. It was years of buried pain, words that had been trapped in her heart, secrets she'd locked away in the hopes that they might disappear. He listened as her breath trembled, and he knew that, in that exhale, she was letting go of something that had defined her for far too long. "I don't know why I survived," she whispered, her voice raw, stripped of any defenses. "There are nights when I think about them, the ones we lost. It feels wrong, being here, being honored for it. They called me brave, gave me medals. But what about them? What about the ones who didn't make it?" Her voice cracked, and Sam felt his heart ache for her, for the guilt that had wrapped around her soul like a chain, for the hollow feeling that had followed her, day after day, night after night. "I didn't want the medals," she continued, her tone full of bitterness. "I didn't want people telling me I was a hero. It felt undeserved. How can they call me a hero when I couldn't save them all? When I couldn't get them home?" Sam took a steadying breath, his voice thick with emotion as he responded. "You did something remarkable," he said softly. "You went through something that would have broken anyone else. And even now, you're here, sharing it. That takes strength. A different kind of courage." Her voice was quiet, uncertain. "I don't feel strong. I feel empty. Like a part of me stayed there, with them. I don't know if I'll ever feel whole again." Sam paused, letting her words settle, sensing the depth of her pain and the struggle she had endured just to make it through every day. "Sometimes," he began, his tone gentle, "when we survive something that others don't, it leaves us with scars we can't see. Survivor's guilt, it's a heavy burden. But I want you to know that your survival doesn't diminish their sacrifice. It doesn't make you unworthy. If anything, it honors them." A faint sound came through the line, almost like a sigh, as if she were taking in his words, trying to let them reach the part of her heart that had felt empty for so long. "I don't know how to let go of it," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "The guilt, the memories, they're all I have left of them." Sam's heart ached, but he kept his voice steady, his words full of empathy. "You don't have to let go of them. They'll always be a part of you. But maybe you can allow yourself to live in a way that honors them. You brought some of them home. You led them, kept them safe. That matters. And by sharing your story, you're giving them a voice too." She was silent for a moment, and Sam could feel the depth of her emotions, the way she was wrestling with the idea of allowing herself to be at peace, of seeing her own survival as something meaningful, something that didn't take away from those she had lost. Do you think this could help someone?" she asked, her voice wavering, as if she were afraid to hope that her story might hold any value beyond her own pain. Sam's voice was soft but unwavering. "Absolutely. There are so many people who feel lost, who carry burdens that no one sees. Your courage, both then and now, in sharing this, might give them the strength to keep going. It might show them that they're not alone, that healing is possible." Another long silence filled the line, and Sam waited, sensing the quiet transformation happening on the other end of the call, the slow, hesitant shift as she began to see herself through a different lens, not just as a survivor weighed down by guilt, but as someone who had done her best, as someone who was worthy of compassion, both from herself and from others. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Thank you for listening, for not judging." "I'm honored you trusted me with this," he replied, his voice full of warmth and gratitude. "You're not alone in this anymore. And every time you share a piece of your story, every time you take a step forward, you're giving yourself the freedom to live, to find peace. You deserve that." She let out another breath, steadier this time, and Sam felt a quiet strength radiating from her, as if a weight had lifted, a small but significant release of the burden she'd carried for so long. I think I'm ready to try," she said softly. To try and move forward. To start letting go, one day at a time. Sam felt a wave of gratitude wash over him, a deep sense of purpose. "That's all any of us can do," he said gently. "One day at a time. And if you ever need to share more of your story, if you ever need someone to listen, I'm here." There was a quiet, almost peaceful pause, and when she spoke again, her voice was tinged with a new softness, a faint, hopeful glimmer. "Thank you, Sam. For everything. I didn't think anyone would understand. But tonight, I feel a little lighter." Sam smiled, a warmth filling his chest. "You've got more strength in you than you realize. And you're not alone. Not anymore." With a final, grateful goodbye, she hung up, leaving Sam in the quiet of the studio, a silence filled with the weight of all she had shared, and the hope of all that lay ahead for her. In the end, it wasn't just her story that had changed. It was his too, a reminder of the power of empathy, of the healing that comes from being heard, from sharing our burdens and finding connection, even in the darkest moments. The line clicked silent as her call ended, leaving Sam in the dim glow of the studio, the lingering weight of her story settling over him like a heavy fog. He sat there for a moment, allowing the silence to sink in, to honor the vulnerability she had shared, the courage it had taken for her to finally let go of a burden she had carried alone for so long. But the quiet didn't last. Almost immediately, the phone lines began lighting up, each one buzzing with voices eager to connect, to respond to what they had just heard. Sam took a deep breath, hit the button for the first line, and a gruff but warm voice filled the studio. "Sam," the caller began, his tone thick with emotion. "I just want to say, that woman? She's a damn hero. I was a medic in Afghanistan, and her story brought back memories I thought I'd left behind. I wish I could tell her thank you. For everything she did. For everything she's still doing by just telling her story." The line clicked, and before Sam could respond, another call came through, a woman this time, her voice trembling. "I'm the wife of a Marine who passed away a few years back. Hearing her story, it was like hearing parts of my husband again. Please, let her know she's not alone. And thank you, Sam, for giving her the space to share that. It means more than you know." And on it went, one caller after another, veterans who recognized themselves in her words, family members of those who had served, and ordinary people who were moved by the raw courage and humanity she had shown. They called to thank her, to share their own experiences, to remind her that she wasn't alone, that there was a community waiting to welcome her with open arms. Sam felt a swell of emotion, his voice thick as he addressed his listeners, each word resonating with the weight of what he had just witnessed. "Tonight, we were given a gift," he said, his voice soft but steady. "We heard from someone who's been through more than most of us can imagine. Her story is a reminder of the hidden battles that so many people carry, the ones they fight quietly, every day. And it's a reminder of the power of sharing those battles, of letting someone else in, if only for a moment." He paused, glancing around the studio as if he could still feel her presence, her courage lingering in the air. This episode is dedicated to a Night Stalker, and to all the unsung heroes out there, the veterans, the survivors, the people who continue to carry burdens in silence. If you know someone who's gone through something similar, reach out to them. Let them know they're not alone. Sometimes, that's all it takes to make a difference. He ended the show with a sense of reverence, a quiet gratitude for the strength she had shown, and a deep appreciation for the resilience he had seen in his listeners that night. The woman hung up the phone, her fingers trembling, her heart still pounding from the intensity of the conversation. She sat in the darkness, letting the words sink in, letting the flood of emotion settle. For the first time in years, she felt lighter. Not healed, not whole, but lighter, as if sharing her story had peeled back a layer of the pain, letting in just a little more air, a little more light. In the days that followed, she thought often about Sam's words, his gentle encouragement, his unwavering belief that she could take this step forward. The voices of the callers echoed in her mind, each one a reminder that she wasn't alone, that there were others who understood, who had walked similar paths. Encouraged by their support, she made a decision. She sought out a local veteran support group, walking through the doors with a sense of quiet determination, her heart pounding with nerves but her spirit bolstered by the memory of that night. She wasn't sure what to expect, but for the first time, she felt ready to be seen, to be heard, to find a path through the darkness she had carried for so long. The journey was only beginning, and she knew the shadows would still be there. But she also knew that she didn't have to walk this path alone. And as she sat in that room, surrounded by others who understood the weight of survival, she felt a small, steady light inside her, a glimmer of hope, a reminder that she was more than her past, more than the night that had tried to claim her. She would keep moving forward, one day at a time, letting the weight fall away little by little. And in that steady, determined march, she began to see herself not as a broken survivor, but as someone strong, resilient, a Night Stalker who had made it home and was finally ready to live again. Disclaimer: this story is a work of fiction. While it draws on real themes of trauma and healing, any resemblance to actual persons or events is purely coincidental. It is intended to raise awareness and foster understanding around the challenges of PTSD and recovery. This story references the Night Stalkers, the nickname for the U.S. Army's 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment, Airborne, known for their specialized nighttime missions. This is a fictional narrative inspired by real challenges many veterans face. What to read next? Pickin' and Grinnin' in the Rockies. Storing your adventure photos online with SmugMug. Desert Storm, a journey through healing and survival. Road Warrior Chronicles, The Last Stand, a haunting journey. Echoes of the Desert.